This is a TBM 940 turboprop, one of the fastest single-engine airplanes in the world. It's made here in Tarbes, France, at a factory right at the foot of the Pyrenees near the Spanish border. The TBM is just a tad too large and complicated to disassemble and pack into a shipping container, so every one of these airplanes has to be flown out to the new owner. Some owners pick up the airplanes in France, but many more are delivered. Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Bertorelli reporting for AVweb. With me today is Margrit Waltz. She's a professional ferry pilot whose job is to deliver these new airplanes, and she has just passed an impressive milestone, her 900th aircraft delivery. Margrit, congratulations on that. It's a lot of airplanes and a lot of miles and hours. Let's start at the beginning. How did you get into this business?
Well, it was more or less a coincidence. I had met my American husband, and I was the weather girl on television in Germany. Well, in America, they didn't need really a meteorologist on television or weather girl on television with a German accent. They had enough people lying about the weather without an accent. So it was like, well, what am I going to do if I really stay in America? And it was like a big decision for me to leave my job and move to the States. And I had, just for fun, I was able to ferry 2 aircraft. So I don't even want to say ferry them. It took a terrible long time, 3 weeks to bring a plane across. It was more like a vacation or something, but the chance to cross the North Atlantic. And I had done that twice and ended up visiting also the Mooney factory. And one thing came to the other, and I was lucky enough to start ferrying Moonies and other aircrafts. And we just started a business then and said, well, forget the weather business. This is a lot more fun. I mean, I started flying with 16, and this was absolutely, the dream of every pilot, at least in my eyes. You're young, you want to see the world, and you have the opportunity to do this pretty much on your own pace. It's fantastic.
So of those 900 deliveries, you have delivered just about every kind of airplane, haven't you?
A lot of single engine, twin engine, piston planes, turboprops. I also have a light jet rating for the Mustang, but that's pretty much it. Yeah, I accompanied a few people on bigger aircrafts, but I don't really count them in my 900 crossings because I didn't have the rating. I wasn't PIC or anything.
And does the 900, is that actual ocean crossings or just deliveries?
Well, all my deliveries are across the ocean. I do not do domestic ones. So all of my crossings are intercontinental. Yeah.
And let's talk about the TBM. TBM is a fast airplane, very capable airplane, and people who buy it for those characteristics. What is involved in taking one of these airplanes across the ocean? So a lot of these deliveries have been North Atlantic crossings, which are typically, since they're coming from France, are going to be westbound, summer and winter, I'm sure. So what are the things you have to plan to make sure you can do that safely?
I mean, of course, since I do this since 1991 for the factory, there's a certain routine involved. I mean, winter crossings are obviously a little bit harder due to weather, due to very strong headwinds, 100 knots, 120 knots. I mean, I had the situation that I actually got airborne with an American customer on board, and we had a forecast of 150, 160 knots, possibly up to 200 knots in altitude. And we said, well, we can make it to Greenland and, squeeze it in there, get some more fuel, continue to Canada. And we got airborne, and it was actually 210 knots or so. We saw something like 89 knots on the ground speed. And the customer kind of said, listen, Margaret, I don't want to sit up here forever and, get on the last drop of fuel into Greenland. So he says, I offer you, we go back. I invite you to the Blue Lagoon in Iceland, spend the day there and refuel your plane tomorrow morning. Winter crossings can be hard. You land with 70, 80 knots on the nose on an icy runway, and it's, you have to make sure your plane gets really secured on the ground. I mean, there are a lot more little logistics to think about, what all can go wrong, basically, because it will go wrong if you don't take care of it. The summer crossings, I think if any pilot wants to do it, you can do it. I mean, I'm normally open to anybody to call me if they want to do it themselves. I give them as much as I can on the way and say, okay, you have to look out for this, you have to look out for that. But basically, it's flying. If you're an average, pilot and you have a TBM, you're quite capable. You have the range with the aircraft. You go in altitude, you're above the weather. I mean, it's just amazing what the plane can do. And I mean, if it's the autopilot or if it's the capability of landing in crosswinds, or the plane is just really amazing, you know. And I was very, very lucky. I was working for Munich, went partly, you know, through the development they had together, and ended up being one of the first people that flew the TBM. So it was just like a miracle. I mean, people didn't even know what it was at the time. It was like, what are you flying? Because we didn't even have really a designator at the time. We started with T700, and somebody said, well, that's not possible. It's a warbird. Then we tried TB70. So we had all different designators, and nobody really knew what we were. And controllers would actually ask, like, what the heck is this? You know, are you a jet? Or so no, single engine turboprop, you know, at the time, 300 knots. Now we are, of course, faster by now. The development is just amazing. I mean, every time you get into the aircraft, you see something new, like something small, something improved. It's really fantastic, you know. So I'm a very, very lucky person to have Daher believing in me all these years and given me the opportunities also to do this, you know.
Let's talk about the TBM range. I'd asked you before we started recording if you've ever had to do ferry tanks in those, and the answer is no. So, but you do have to do fairly careful planning on some of these long legs. So if we take the North Atlantic, absent any exceptional winds, you've got plenty of fuel for that. And what's the typical route?
For the North Atlantic, I leave Tarbes. I normally go up to Scotland. I used to go a lot into Glasgow, into Newcastle, which is just northern England. Lately, I go into Wick in Scotland. From there, I go to Iceland. Iceland, I stay the night quite often, refuel. And then the next day, if the wind is not too bad, I can easily take kind of a 15-knot headwind overall. Then I can make it to Canada. Occasionally, I have to land in Greenland. But then, of course, you can also go a little bit further north there, the range over to Canada. If you want to avoid Greenland, you can make that in general as well. So I would say probably 8 flights out of 10, I do not have to stop in Greenland.
You do the Pacific too, and you're doing these long legs in the Pacific, but since you're not using ferry tanks, what route do you use from France to get to destinations in the Pacific?
Well, it depends. If the plane goes to Australia, if it's in France, obviously I end up going eastbound. So there's not that much Pacific there. I mean, you go from France to Malta or Greece, and then you go into Alexandria or Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. From there, you end up going to Oman. Occasionally, depending on the wind, you might have to stop in Bahrain for a little bit more fuel or so. Then from Oman, or Fujairah, you can go over to India. You do a refuel stop in Mumbai, down to Sri Lanka. From Sri Lanka, you have a long leg, like max range long leg, 5 hours plus. There you really have to monitor the wind, but in general, the wind is very, very weak on that part because you're close to the equator. You're getting quite far south, so you don't have these tremendous winds. Over to Medan in Indonesia. That's a real long leg. And then from Indonesia, from Medan, I should say, in general, I make Bali. Every now and then, I might have to stop in Singapore for a little bit of fuel, but I try to just go to Bali because the less landings you have, the less overflight permits, the less landing permits, of course, the less cost for handling for everything else. So you try as a ferry pilot not to stop if you don't have to. And then from Bali into Australia.
Do you handle all of that permitting and overflight administration yourself, or do you have someone do it?
Partly I do it myself. Partly it depends what country. Some countries are more difficult than others. Some countries you need diplomatic clearances and things. I have some handling company that helps me out there. It's like a company in Germany, AirOps.
What do you think is the biggest challenge in doing this kind of flying in the TBM? Is it weather, or is it overflight administration kind of stuff?
It's probably the paperwork, to be honest. I mean, it's not the flying itself. The plane is just so forgiving, and I mean, it has all the possibilities. Like I say, you have range, you have speed. You're sitting pressurized, you're in comfort. I mean, you have everything going for yourself there. But in the end, it really is very important that on some of these legs, especially if you go out of Europe east, you need all these permits and stuff, and something is not in place. And for this permit, you need this. For this permit, you need that. Some people, then they want the maximum takeoff weight. That's okay. So you send them this already in anticipation that they will want to know these things. But then, for example, this aircraft I'm right now en route with is going into Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia, all of a sudden, what are the limitations of the aircraft? And I'm thinking by myself, who cares? Why would they want the limitation of the aircraft? That's a new question. I haven't had that before. So, but it's not your turn to ask, why do you want this? It's just do, because otherwise it's not going to happen. Then comes the next thing. I mean, they're working very often 5 to 7 working days before you can actually get a permit back. So you have to really plan ahead and make sure everything is in place. Or now, of course, with COVID, it has gotten a lot more complicated because this country wants 48 hours before a COVID test. This country wants 72 hours a COVID test. If you're alone, you're normally exempt if you only stay as crew and quarantine the one night you are in a country test. And I feel like, you know, somebody's starting to poke my brain a little bit too much. I'm getting tired of it, you know. I mean,
I don't blame you. Have you encountered any kind of weather that's unflyable with regard to ice? You mentioned winds. You will hit winds where the fuel gets a little tight. How about ice? The TBM is approved for known icing.
Yes, it is. And I would say I have not been stopped because of icing conditions. And obviously it can get pretty rough. I mean, there's, I guess, in the end, a little bit of common sense. If I see they have like severe freezing rain on departure or on landing, obviously I'm trying to avoid that. But so far, it really hasn't stopped me from going anywhere I wanted to go, you know. I mean, the only time I think I got twice really stuck for weather, and this did not have to do with icing. It was a situation that the next airport was 5 days underwater because of some tropical depression in Australia. And I ended up being stuck 5 days in Bali. But this did not have anything to do with the TBM because it wasn't even my decision. The airport was closed. You know, so
what kind of emergency survival equipment do you typically carry on these flights?
well, I have a raft with me. I have a survival suit, which is like a dry suit that I wear. I know some guys start wearing some other things, figuring they get saved fairly fast, maybe. I still go with the old style survival suit where I basically can survive 3 days in it. They at least say the first day is comfortable. Not that I can imagine that it's comfortable if you lay in the North Atlantic and don't know if you get found and you have the big waves around you. But they say it's comfortable temperature-wise. The second day is kind of getting a little nippy cold in the suit. And the third day is pretty much survivable. So they might pull you out. You might be a little bit hypothermia or whatever, but it's survivable. And I figure after 3 days of no food, I will die anyway, you know. So, I mean, I rely that they would find me within 3 days. And I mean, today with GPS and everything, you can give a pretty exact position report and you have an ELT with you. And there's a very good chance of survival if you do a decent ditching.
But in 900 crossings, you've never had to test that equipment, I take it.
No, I have had it on a few times thinking I might need it. I had in the 80s, I had a Mooney with a problem of non-pressurized magnetos. They were installed by mistake and the engine quit over the North Atlantic. And I put out an emergency, and Pan Am at the time was still around and they were relaying, and the pilot was rather shocked. He asked me actually he said what my problem was. I said my engine quit, and he has said which one did quit. Obviously he was sitting in a 747 and couldn't imagine that you would be out there around 30 west with one engine. And I have to say, in spite of all the stress at the moment, I was rather annoyed and said, the only one I got, the one in front. And he answered, oh my God, so, but it started around 3,000. I kept trying to start her, and around 3,000 feet, she started rumbling again. And I finished the flight over to Shannon in Ireland. In 3,000 feet, I just thought, I don't want it. She's running in 3,000 feet, let her run in 3,000 feet, don't descend, don't climb, don't challenge her, as long as she runs in 3,000 feet. I mean, I have to admit, I was finishing that leg on the edge of my seat, waiting for her to quit again, but she brought me over, and that's all it takes, In those type of situations, my planes turn into girlfriends, and I relate to them as she's, and and she did a good job. Yeah, she brought me over to Ireland.
Well, that and 900 crossings, that's a pretty good record. I think we would all envy it. Margrit Waltz, thanks very much for talking to us. It's a very interesting business, ferrying these airplanes. Well,
I love it, and like I say, I just hope that somebody can step into my shoes and enjoy it as much as me. It's a full commitment. There are no holidays anywhere that you ever stop. And I mean, Daher was wonderful to me all these years. And I'm, like I said before, extremely happy that they believed in me. And I try to give 120%. They need me on Mother's Day, anniversary, birthday, Christmas. Well, that's when you go.
All right. Thank you very much. You've been listening to AVweb's podcast with Margrit Waltz. I'm Paul Bertorelli reporting for AVweb. Thanks for watching.